again. Hello, it's Mark Weiss again, and I wanted to start on part two of the wedding with you today. I'll do a quick review, but we really need to get moving. We started out talking about the betrothal and how Yahweh came to Abraham with the idea of giving uh, a people to him, and then he did so by coming to Moses while the children of Israel were in Egypt, and he said, "We're going to get you out of here, and you will be my people." And then we moved through Mount Sinai and the adulterous acts of the children of Israel right during the wedding, which occurred on Mount Sinai. And then in Jeremiah 31, we had Yahweh speaking and saying that he was the husband unto the children of Israel, but this shall be the covenant that he will make a new one, and that he will write the law, the Torah, in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and they will be his people. So we're going to pick up there. We've already had the adulterous acts, and we have some things going on, because obviously he's not just going to pick back up for them to be his people. In Jeremiah 34, verse 8 through 22, this is the word that came unto Jeremiah from Yahweh. After that the king Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people which were in Jerusalem, to proclaim liberty unto them, that every man should let his manservant and every man his maidservant, being a Hebrew or Hebrewess, go free, that none should serve himself of them, of a Jew his brother. Now when all the princes and all the people which had entered into the covenant heard that every one should let his manservant and every one should let his maidservant go free, that none should serve themselves of them any more, then they obeyed and let them go. But afterward they turned, and caused the servants and the handmaids whom they had let go to return, and brought them into subjection for servants and for handmaids. Therefore the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah, saying, Thus saith Yahweh your Elohim of Israel, I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondmen, saying, At the end of 7 years let ye go every man his brother a Hebrew, which has been sold unto thee. And when he has served thee 6 years, you shall let him go free from you. But your fathers hearkened not unto me, neither inclined their ear. And ye were not turned, and had done right in my sight, in proclaiming liberty every man to his neighbor. And ye had made a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. But ye turned and polluted my name, and caused every man his servant, and every man his handmaid, whom he had set at liberty at their pleasure, to return, and brought them into subjection, to be unto you for servants and for handmaids. Therefore saith Yahweh, Ye have not hearkened unto me in proclaiming liberty every one to his brother, and every one to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim liberty for you, to the sword, to the pestilence, and to the famine, and I will make you to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And I will give the men that have transgressed my covenant, which have not performed the words of the covenant which they had made before me, when they cut the calf in twain, and passed between the parts thereof, the princes of Judah and the princes of Jerusalem, the eunuchs and the priests, and all the people of the land, which passed between the parts of the calf, I will even give them into the hands of their enemies, and into the hand of them that seek their life. And their dead bodies shall be the meat unto the fowls of the heaven, and to the beasts of the earth. And Zedekiah king of Judah and his princes will I give into the hand of their enemies, and into the hand of them that seek their life, and into the hand of the king of Babylon's armies, which are gone up from you. Behold, I will command says Yahweh, and cause them to return to this city, and they shall fight against it and take it and burn it with fire. I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without an inhabitant. It's a really sad thing when the Torah was given to the children of Israel, and now, down the line here, in the time of Jeremiah, they're not able to keep it, or they refuse to keep it, or whatever the case may be. They've decided against it. They probably liked having servants, people to do their work. I don't blame them. But I do see where the law was supposed to be kept, and it wasn't being kept. This pushing out of the people and causing them to go back into captivity reminds me of the bill of divorcement that I heard about growing up, and I didn't pay any much attention to it because there was a lot of issues with that, and there still are a lot of issues with it. There's the idea that you shouldn't get divorced, and that Yeshua would never divorce his wife, and all of these things come into play, and people have all sorts of ideas about it, and they make statements based on their feelings from what they believe goes on throughout the rest of the Bible. Well, I didn't really understand it, and as most people, I just believed that it was tongue-in-cheek, and that it really didn't have meaning, but that it could be determined down the road that there was meaning. Well, I would like to share with you today this bill of divorcement and why it is necessary for there to be a bride. Well, let's build some background first. I'm going to go through a bunch of scriptures that talk about divorce, and then we'll review some of these parts. Not all of them we're going to review immediately. Some of this stuff will come down the line, and some of it we'll just see scattered throughout the rest of the messages that pertain to the wedding. Please be patient. So let's talk about the bill of divorcement. We go to 1 Corinthians 7, verse 39. In the ESV it says, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in Yahweh. Jeremiah 3, verse 1, in the ESV, if a man divorces his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's wife, will he return to her? Would not that land be greatly polluted? You have played the whore with many lovers, and would you return to me? Declares Yahweh. And those are good questions. Jeremiah 3, verse 8. She saw that for all the adulteries of that faithless one, Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she too went and played the whore. And that's what we see in Jeremiah when Yahweh kicks them out of the land. Isaiah 50, verse 1, thus says Yahweh, where is your mother's certificate of divorce, with which I sent her away? Or which of my creditors is it to whom I have sold you? Behold, for your iniquities you were sold, and for your transgressions your mother was sent away. A lot of these things, a lot of these scriptures will say this, some of the same thing, but I think it's important because we find this throughout the entire Bible, both the front part and the last part. 1 Corinthians 7, verses 10 through 11. To the married I give this charge, not I, but Yahweh. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. And I'm thinking that's probably where most of the ideas of there not being a divorce come from, because they're saying the woman should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried. And I've heard that before, and I'm guessing that this is where this came from. Romans 7, 2 through 3. For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, She will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. In Leviticus 20, verse 10, if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. These are all scriptures that say similar things, but yes, there are different aspects to each one, and I'm not going to go over all of it now, but I wanted to bring these out because they all say things that are very important and very much part of what we're talking about. So this is where we stand. The nation of Israel committed adultery at Mount Sinai, and those people were put to death before reaching the promised land. Put to death, died. We did review earlier where Yahweh did say they would not make it into the promised land. They would surely die. To me, they were put to death then, or they were not allowed to live into the promised land. The nation of Israel that was young continued into the promised land with the understanding that the covenant was still alive with them. But eventually they sinned and went after other gods. Thus the need for certificate of divorcement. I'll say that again. Thus, after all of that, we actually have the need for a certificate of divorcement. But she is still called adulteress because her husband lives. And I know this may not all make sense. Some of you go, oh wow. We put this in context. Where we are specifically in the time frame, the husband lives. This is where Yeshua comes to life and as a human, and then he dies, allowing Israel to be free from that law of marriage. And I know all of this may not make much sense, but let's continue because we really will start to put things together as we go. I'm building some foundation. We talked about the marriage in the first part of the Bible, and then now we have this issue, the problems that have arisen because the nation of Israel isn't following the way correctly, and that means they're not following the ketubah, so that jeopardizes their marriage. And now I've read some statements, and you've heard some statements that may not make a whole lot of sense to you. The need for a certificate of divorcement, that's one thing. And then she's called adulteress because her husband lives, and you go, what? This keys right into where now Yeshua will come to the earth. All of this was planned all the way from the beginning, before creation, and now we're starting to see some of these pieces of the puzzle fall into place. So what's the next step? The next step in this process is coming right up. Galatians 4, verse 3 through 5. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time was come, Yah sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. It says it right there. The redemption. And many of you who are listening understand the redemption process and understand this redeeming. And I thought I did as well, based on how this was brought forth from people's messages. But I'm going to share something that was new to me a few years ago when a detailed study of Ruth occurred, and it applies here. And so we'll talk about it. We're going to talk about the kinsman redeemer. Here is the detail about the kinsman redeemer, just as an overview, and then we'll really talk about it. The nearest of kin had the responsibility of redeeming his kinsman's lost opportunities. If a person was forced into slavery, his redeemer purchased his freedom. When debt threatened to overwhelm him, the kinsman stepped in to redeem his homestead and let the family live. If a family member died without any heir, the kinsman gave his name by marrying the widow and rearing a son to hand down his name. When death came at the hands of another man, the Redeemer acted as the avenger of blood and pursued the killer. The right of redemption and the office belonged to the nearest kinsman. Yeshua is the great kinsman of his people. When their liberty was lost in Egypt, he rescued them from bondage. Remember, I am Yahweh. I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments. Job's faith is seen reaching out and proclaiming that Yahweh will provide his Go'ol, his kinsman redeemer. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. Job 19:25. Job's hope looked to the coming Messiah. He affirmed his faith that his Redeemer will come to the earth. There's a lot in there, but we're going to talk about each and every aspect of it. Right at the very top, if a person was forced into slavery, his Redeemer purchased his freedom. When debt threatened to overwhelm him, the kinsman stepped in to redeem his homestead. These are interesting things. If a family member died without an heir, the kinsman gave his name by marrying the widow and rearing a son to hand down his name. These all seem very complex to some extent, but they've all been talked about throughout the Torah. And if you've done a detailed study on the Torah, you will see some of these things come out quickly, and they are repeated. So let's talk about the kinsman redeemer, because this is the next step in the timeline for the nation of Israel. We can't talk about kinsman redeemer without going to Ruth. Ruth 4 gives us details about what the kinsman redeemer was responsible for doing. He was responsible for buying back those sold into slavery and buying back the inheritance and paying off any debts. Let's go to verse 14 of Ruth 4. And the woman said unto Naomi, Blessed be Yahweh, which has not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel, and he shall be unto thee a restorer of life, and a nourisher of thine old age. That's a lot right there. That is a lot that is said. Very interesting. The nearest of kin had the responsibility of redeeming his kinsman's lost opportunities. If a person was forced into slavery, his Redeemer purchased his freedom. When debt threatened to overwhelm him, the kinsman stepped in to redeem his homestead and let the family live. Remember, the children of Israel in Jeremiah were going to be kicked out of the land. What is the land? The land is their it's their inheritance. It's our inheritance. Doesn't it blow your mind? Just me saying that. We'd require a kinsman redeemer in order to get back that inheritance. But Yahweh let that inheritance go on purpose. As a kind of a curse, it was certainly a judgment on the children of Israel for their adulterous acts, even after Mount Sinai. So let's go to Romans 6. We'll read verse 14. Most of you know these scriptures and understand these scriptures, but as we start to put them into the context of the Redeemer, maybe some other pieces will fit together for you. For sin shall not be master over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. What law? The law concerning being adulterous. Does it not make sense now? We were talking about sin, and being an adulterous person is sin, and these things all are part of the wedding or the marriage. Galatians 3 verse 13, Christ, Yeshua, redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. Curse of what law? The curse of the law concerning marriage. Galatians 5 verse 1, it was for freedom that Yeshua set us free. Therefore keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. What slavery? The slavery of sin. We're born into sin. These things are really starting to come together, I hope, as we move through this. Romans 3 verse 24, Colossians 1 verse 14, Ephesians 1 7, and Exodus 6 6. The Israelites were redeemed from bondage by our Heavenly Father. Remember, we're all born in a state of slavery. Everyone is held captive by sin from birth. But yet the reminders are all there. John 8:34, Yeshua said, whoever commits sin is the servant of sin. Romans 6:17, Paul said, described the Roman Christians as the servants of sin before they were saved. Romans 7 verse 14, Paul also said that he was sold under sin. And Romans 8:21, in the future creation will be delivered from the bondage of corruption. Bondage, the state of slavery, servants, these are all aspects of this situation that we find ourselves in. And Romans 6 verse 17 spells it out. How do we get away from that? Well, we have to go through a conversion, and that conversion process shows us that we have a way out, and that way out is through our kinsman redeemer. Remember, Yeshua wears many hats. He wore several hats when he was on earth, and he died wearing several hats, and now he'll come back. He'll come back for his people wearing several hats. It's very amazing. And we knew these things, but it just complicated our understanding. And I hope that maybe, if nothing else, we can just grab hold of this one line of thinking and maybe just use it to move forward in our lives, as in our relationship with Yeshua and our Heavenly Father. So sin demands a price be paid. Mark 10:45. Talks about that a price must be paid. Romans 6:23, ultimately the price that must be paid is death. The wages of sin is death. Hebrews 9:22, without shedding of blood is no remission of sins. Ezekiel 18:20, the soul that sins, it shall die. Yeshua redeemed us by paying the price sin required. Galatians 5 verse 1, it was for freedom that Yeshua set us free. So we all understand that. We all understand that the wages of sin is death. But did we pay attention to what was said earlier about the adulterous woman? I'll read that again for you, if I can find it. I believe it was Leviticus. Yes, Leviticus 20 verse 10. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Which is exactly what happened in Mount Sinai, in the wilderness. The children of Israel had to be put to death. Romans 6 verse 18, being then made free from sin, you become the servants of righteousness. Galatians 3:13, Yeshua has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, and he hung on a tree. And it actually spells it out in the Torah that if a man hangs on a tree, he is a curse. We'll go to Hebrews 2:14 through 15. As the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same. God became man, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who, through fear of death, were all their lifetime subject to bondage. There's several things in that passage that come to life. As the children are partakers of flesh and blood, well, that would be the Passover. The Passover is how we partake in flesh and blood. And we remember through that process it's a memorial. It's commanded to be a memorial. That we remember the blood covenant. And the blood covenant is the wedding, is the marriage. It's all involved. So all of this is the kinsman redeemer, the one who pays the bride price as well. It is speculation on my part, but I believe these two amounts of money are similar enough to make a connection. Deuteronomy 22, verse 29, we have an instance where a man pays the bride price for a virgin of 50 pieces of silver. Then we have Yeshua, who is sold for 30 pieces of silver in Matthew 26:15. To me, that's too much of a coincidence to avoid making a connection. There are other connections between the buying and selling of his garments and all of these other things when he is crucified that tie into things within the Torah. So I do believe this is a connection, although many would say that that's a stretch. I bring it up nonetheless. So we go to Ephesians 2, verse 14 and 15. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace. Colossians 2, verse 13 through 14. When you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decree against us, which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. He took the certificate of debt, which is our price, the price over our head for the adultery. The curse of the law means the punishment for committing adultery, which is stated in Leviticus 20, verse 10, is death. Yeshua, our elder brother, our kinsman, the Torah husband, and our groom-to-be, died. He paid the price for the punishment for the bride's adultery. As it says in Romans 7, verse 2 through 3, the woman can marry again once the husband has died. And as it says in Romans 7, 4, that husband will be him who is raised from the dead. Both of those things really tie into where we go from here. First, he had to die to pay the price. Somebody had to die to pay the adulterous price. And also, the woman could remarry once her husband died. And then in Romans 7:4, it's amazing that it actually says the husband will be he who is raised from the dead, which we know is Yeshua. The connections are unmistakable. Let's go to Matthew 5, verse 17, and hear some more words from Yeshua. Do not think that I come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Never have those words meant so much and been so true than in this place. And I always despised this scripture because people use it to say that they can do what they want. No, it says that we can remarry after this. It says that he came to fulfill what adultery had done to the law, what our adultery, what the children of Israel's adultery had done to the law. It required judgment, and it always requires judgment. And if people think that that doesn't have to happen, they are sorely mistaken, because it does. So we have the kinsman redeemer. We have this connection now. And we have these things occurring. And I think I'll stop right there, as we have now kind of bridged the gap between the old and the new. And we come back and we'll talk about the new, and we'll talk about how things go from here. I appreciate your time. I pray that you're blessed by this. And I pray that you come back for more, because we haven't finished yet. We're just getting started, really. Blessings to you.